Today on Across the Fence, we're on the road at the University of Vermont's Fleming Museum of Art. We're here to look at two miniature exhibitions sure to make a big impression on museum viewers. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Keith Silva. We all know it's the little things that make a difference. Some painstaking detail that shows how much someone cares, or a clue easily overlooked that changes our perception of a place. Small worlds, miniatures in contemporary art, and global miniatures on display at the Fleming Museum of Art offer visitors not an insignificant amount of fantasy, nostalgia, and whimsy. These works may be small in stature, but they prompt big emotions that run the gamut from wonder to terror. To get us started is the director of the Fleming Museum of Art, Jeanne Cohen. Jeanne, nice to have you back on Across the Fence.
Delighted to be here.
How did this exhibit come about, and how was it inspired by the Fleming's permanent collection?
So we are always on the lookout for exhibitions that are suggested by the collection. So we have a collection of 25,000 objects, and it is impossible as you walk through the storage areas, excuse me, to overlook the fact that there are a lot of really tiny things in it. So, we've been aware of this over the years, and Andrea, coming in several years ago as a new curator, she came in with her own passion for the miniature. So this was unnatural, and it was kind of inevitable that, she would do an exhibition based on the small things in the collection. And then also, she noticed, as other curators have in the country, a trend of contemporary artists who are focusing on the miniature as well.
What makes small things art, or at least interesting enough to become part of the collection? You said you have dozens, thousands of things in your collection. So how do small things work their way in there?
I think, what it tells us is that artists and artisans through the centuries and through the millennia and across cultures have made miniature objects. And there are many reasons why they've done this, everything from creating small religious objects that, that people can carry with them all the time, to tourist items that people doing the grand tour in the 18th and 19th century could easily bring home with them. So there are a lot of reasons why they were created, but they really are ubiquitous.
With both of these shows, the miniatures know no boundaries whatsoever. How do different cultures use miniatures?
So, again, it really has to do probably less with the culture than with the intention or the purpose for that object. So, for instance, miniature Bibles, and there's some in the global mini show, really, really tiny, that were sold or were made for for people in the church to carry on them with a magnifying glass, so that they had this at hand all the time. So there are things in various cultures, again, for different uses, and excuse me, they show up sometimes within different cultures for the same kinds of intentions, and other times they'll be very, very different and surprising kinds of miniature.
Can you read a miniature Bible? You said they came with a magnifying glass, so it's the whole thing.
Yeah, you can. Wow. Yeah, with effort.
with effort. Well, in a minute, we'll get more into detail on both of these exhibitions with the museum's curator. But first, Jeanne, let us in on some of the highlights of the talks that you have going on, the tours at the Fleming this spring.
Sure. We have a lot of really exciting programs planned in conjunction with these exhibitions. We've got two artist talks in connection with the contemporary show. So the first one is on March 20th, and that is Mohammed Hafez, who is the artist whose work appears right behind us, and he is speaking on the subject of homeland insecurity, which speaks to the reason why he created these pieces. And it should be a very interesting and moving talk. And then March 30th, Matt Neckers, who is a Vermont artist, and Andrea, I think, will be speaking a little bit about him, created a traveling museum of miniature art. He'll be giving a workshop on Saturday, March 30th, from 1 to 3:30 on making miniature art, which should be really exciting. And people can sign up for that online. And then Brian Collier, who teaches art at St. Michael's College, also obviously based in Vermont, has a really fascinating collection of classification system for very small objects. And he will be talking about his work on April 19th. So, and all of these are online and in our printed newsletter as well.
Well, Janey, thank you very much. For a full slate of programming happening at the Fleming Museum of Art, as well as hours and admission, visit uvm.edu/Fleming or call 802-656-0750. The spring exhibition runs until May 10th. Andrea Rosen is joining me now. She is the curator here at the Fleming. Always good to see you, Andrea.
Always good to see you.
Jeannie's given us a big picture of some of the exhibitions, but let's get into the specifics. What are viewers going to see when they visit Small Worlds?
So Small Worlds, they'll see work by 10 artists working around the country who make work in miniature. Sometimes they're constructing themselves, sometimes they're using found objects, sometimes they're showing the sculptures themselves, sometimes they're photographing the miniatures and then showing those. I think there's, a natural appeal to the miniature, and that's going to draw viewers into what these artists have created, and then you get to sort of awe at the intricacy of what they've created, and through that access the message, what they're trying to communicate.
One of the things that comes up in this show is fantasy and whimsy. What is that theme in this show?
So certainly when you create these small worlds out of miniatures, there is that element of fantasy, of creating a new world that you are accessing. And so when you say the word whimsy, I think of the photographers, they go by the name Mini Meam, it's a couple, and they put miniature train figures on food, and the food, like a kiwi, becomes the lawn that they're mowing. And so things like that are just really kind of clever twists on as objects get translated through scale.
And on the flip side, there's also a dark undercurrent running through this show. Terror and fear.
Yeah,
what's going on?
Maybe not terror and fear, but I think that several of the artists use miniatures to address really serious issues. So a few of the artists have used fantasy to envision a miniature world of environmental catastrophe. Or in the case of Mohammed Hafez, who will come and speak, as Janey said, he's referring back to the destruction of his homeland. He's a Syrian-American artist. So I think, again, the miniature can draw you in and then maybe sort of appeal to you and then kind of entice you into thinking about these deeper issues.
Oh, do you have a favorite small world here?
Yeah, so Sally Curcio is an artist who lives in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is where I went to college. I went to Smith College there. And she has two miniatures actually borrowed from the Smith Museum inside these bubbles, where she has recreated the landscape of that area, once in the winter and once in the summer. I like the summer one because I like color. And there's the characteristic Oxbow Lake, and there's a miniature of Northampton and my college campus right inside, so I have a personal tie to that one. She has another one that's of Central Park West in New York, and I grew up there as well. So some great personal ties to those.
Well, nice to know she can make those for you for this show. That's really nice for her. Across the Marble Cart and the Wall Cart is the Walcott Gallery. Global Miniatures is the show that you have there. What about the fascination of humans and miniatures? As you were putting the show together, what were you thinking about for the Walcott?
Yeah, for that, and Jane talked about this a little bit, I was thinking about what were the functions that these different cultures employed miniature. So, for example, in burials, several cultures use miniatures of real-world objects to basically serve the deceased spirit. Or you see, of course, with miniatures, we associate them with childhood and toys, and then you're teaching children with dollhouses about their gender roles. So I think it pops up over and over.
I was thinking about, Janey mentioned tourism and the mini Eiffel Tower that my parents brought back from their trip to Paris. Is that the sort of item that you're talking about here? And it seems silly to have it in a museum, so.
Well, there's a whole section of that gallery that's devoted to tourist artifacts, because that's a lot of what's in our collection. Collectors in the 19th and early 20th century, let's say they were visiting an indigenous culture in the Northwest coast. Those cultures, as they came into contact with European traders and tourists, ended up creating a lot of miniature totem poles or miniature canoes or miniatures of their houses, and that's a lot of what collectors collected, and that's a lot of what ended up in the museum's collection. So that's like a whole subset of stuff that we have, and just a few examples on view in that gallery.
There's also an interactive part of the show that visitors can interact with, take part in. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Janey mentioned our two Vermont artists in the show, Matt Neckers and Brian Collier, and both of their projects are interactive. So Matt Neckers has created this museum of miniature artworks that takes different forms, including a camper that's going to come to the museum on May 4th. The interactive one in the show is in a vintage refrigerator, and visitors can become guest curators of the museum and rearrange the miniature artworks inside of it. As Janey said, Brian Collier has this whole classification of very small objects that he's invented, and visitors can contribute their own. So you could dig a piece of fuzz out of your pocket, and there's a whole procedure to follow about how you name it. You put it in a vial, and you add it to the collection.
Well, as long as those guest curators don't replace you, I think we'll be in good shape. One last thing, we just got about a minute. How can people find out about the Fleming Museum and get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Sure. Well, of course, visit our website, the address you've already provided. Of course, you can talk to us on social media, on our Facebook and Instagram pages. There's a lot of exciting stuff this semester, so if you can find a copy of our newsletter, which details even more programs that Janey didn't have time to mention, there's some really great things going on.
And that's on the website too. So
that is on the website too.
Perfect. Well, Andrea, thank you very much. Really appreciate catching up with you. As we say goodbye, I want to thank our Across the Fence crew, Rebecca Gollin and Marco Ayala, and our hosts here at the Fleming Museum. And as always, thank you for stopping by Across the Fence.